What's up, everyone? My name is Seth, and today I want to talk to you all about a guitar that's very special to me, and it's this 2009 Gibson Les Paul Custom. This was my first ever high-end guitar, and at the time of filming this video, it's one that I've had for nearly half my life, which is kind of crazy to think about. Because I've had it for so long, I wanted to make a video to share the story behind this guitar, as well as show it to you all in its current form. So without further ado, let's get started. Back when I got this guitar, I had been playing for several years, but all my other functional guitars were decidedly metal guitars with Floyd Rose bridges. Now in hindsight, this was a terrible idea because I had no idea how to properly set up a Floyd Rose bridge, but I was a teenager obsessed with dive bombs and making other obnoxious whammy noises, so I didn't really have anything else with a hardtail at that time. Despite my minor Floyd Rose obsession, I had wanted a Les Paul for several years just because it was my absolute favorite of all the classic body shapes, and it still is to this day. I think one of the main reasons why I started to get into Les Pauls so much was because I saw a lot of my favorite players at that time using Les Pauls or some other Les Paul adjacent guitar. Whether they were from the more classic rock and metal bands my dad introduced me to, or the more modern bands that I was listening to at that time. As silly as this is, I can also vaguely remember almost exclusively selecting some type of Les Paul for my characters to play in the Guitar Hero games, so it might be fair to say that the Les Paul was my favorite shape even before I knew anything about actually playing the guitar. As a teenager, I always thought the Les Paul Custom looked a lot cooler than the Les Paul Standard just because I wasn't really crazy about most of the classic burst finishes at that time. I also used to hang out at music stores a lot, and I remember hearing the older players saying that the Les Paul Customs were the better guitar for rock and metal music, so that also contributed to me gravitating more towards customs over standards. At that time, most of the Les Paul Customs that I was seeing on a regular basis were the classic black and the Alpine white versions. I think the first time I ever saw a wine red Les Paul Custom was either in Guitar Center's catalog or on their website while I was just randomly scrolling through it one day. Regardless, the first time I ever saw this, I pretty much immediately fell in love with it because A, in my opinion, it just looks awesome, and B, this was so different from every other Les Paul Custom I had seen up to that point. Obviously though, as you're no doubt aware, custom shop Gibsons are very, very expensive and pretty much always have been, so this was way more than what I could afford with the little money that I had saved up back then. My family was also going through a lot at that time, and I wasn't really in a position where I could go out and get a job, so it seemed like the chances of me getting any type of Les Paul were very slim. Having said that, getting this guitar ended up actually being possible just because of how incredibly supportive my parents and grandparents are, despite everything that was going on back then. Prior to making this video, I was talking to my grandfather about this guitar, and he remembers that even back then, I was pretty much always talking about all kinds of guitars, but the one that I kept bringing up was this wine red Les Paul Custom. Because he and my grandmother knew just how much I loved the guitar and how passionate I was about music in general, they decided to help me get this as their way to show support for my dream of someday becoming a professional musician. Hindsight 2020, this probably was not their best investment. In all seriousness, and I know this is super cliche to say, so forgive me, but words cannot adequately express just how thankful I am to my family for being as supportive as they are, both then and now. Because the moment I held this guitar in my hands for the first time, I knew it was unlike anything else I had ever played up to that point. In the days, months, and years that followed, I played this guitar pretty much any chance I could. In terms of total hours played, I think this guitar probably has the most out of all of my guitars just by virtue of how much I played it back then. I brought this thing to countless band practices, church gigs, guitar lessons, family functions, literally anywhere I could bring this, I brought it regardless of whether or not I could even plug it into anything. Looking back, I feel like that was the time period when I started to really feel like a musician rather than just some kid who plays guitar. It felt like my ability to play the guitar and write songs improved significantly, and this is the guitar that I was playing the most at that time. Now, to be clear, I don't think I got better because I had a very nice, expensive guitar, because that's just silly. The real reason why I got better was because I was playing effectively non-stop. That said though, the fact that I had what was essentially my dream guitar at the time definitely inspired me to play more than I already was. I was also able to experiment with different tunings and things for the first time, since this guitar was unsurprisingly way easier to set up than any of my Floyd Rose-equipped guitars. Granted, I gotta be honest, 90% of that tuning experimentation was just me trying different and lower drop tunings. Another thing worth mentioning is that this was also the guitar that really jump-started my interest in learning about all the different specs and components that make up an electric guitar. Initially just because I wanted to try to understand the things that I liked or didn't like about this in comparison to other guitars that I played. As a result, this ended up being one of the first guitars that I ever started to tinker with by replacing the parts myself. Pretty early on, I replaced the knobs with a set of gold speed knobs just because I thought it would look cool and set my guitar apart from most of the other wine red Les Paul customs out in the world. Later on, I replaced the stock tuners with a set of Gotoh locking tuners since the stock Grovers started to feel a little sloppy and inconsistent for my liking. Thankfully, these Gotohs dropped right in, so I didn't have to drill any new holes, and since they're locking tuners, this helped me a lot back in the day since I was experimenting with different string gauges pretty regularly, so string changes were made a lot faster, and to this day I still swear by locking tuners. I've also replaced the three-way switch, pots, and output jack with a bundle that I got from Mojo Tone for two main reasons. First, the stock switch was starting to fail, likely from overuse since I used to love being obnoxious and would rapidly switch from bridge to neck on this guitar, especially after I learned that with a Les Paul, you can roll down one of the volume controls and have a makeshift kill switch. At that time, I don't think I was able to get a bundle that included a gold selector switch, so that's why this switch doesn't match the rest of the hardware. The second reason for the swap was because I had read that Gibson uses 300K pots on their Les Paul customs, and as some of you may know, 500K is often regarded as the standard for humbuckers. I remember reading a ton of different articles and forum posts of people saying that swapping these out to a set of 500K pots would help the guitar sound a lot more open and clear, and since that sounded like a good thing to me, I figured I'd swap out the pots rather than swapping out the pickups. Now, I should probably mention that I'm not the best at soldering now, and I was even worse at soldering back when I did this, so I somehow managed to wire this all up in a way that the neck tone pot does not work. One of these days I may be brave enough to try to fix it, or maybe I'll just end up swapping everything out for a solderless harness. We'll see what happens. Aside from those mods and the color, this is pretty much just your standard Les Paul custom spec-wise, so it's really not all that different from the Les Paul customs that Gibson's making today. Before I decided to make this video, this guitar was honestly looking a little bit neglected and in need of a deep cleaning, but once that was done, I was pretty surprised to see that this guitar is actually in very good condition despite the years of abuse. Overall, I'd say that you can definitely tell that this guitar has been played, but it's nowhere near relic levels of wear and tear. There's definitely some tarnishing on the hardware, especially the bridge thanks to the years of palm mutes, but most of the gold plating is surprisingly still there. There's also some spots where the nitro started to get a little cloudy, and there's all sorts of little impressions, dings, nicks, and just general play wear. This guitar also definitely needs some fretwork. When I was cleaning up the fretboard, I noticed that there's quite a few frets that have started to really flatten out thanks to the many hours of playtime this guitar has seen. For now, it's still playable, but when the time comes, I'll probably get this guitar refretted with some stainless steel frets just because I greatly prefer stainless steel. I just have to try to find someone reputable who can do it without breaking the bank. I know this next point is highly subjective, but I just have to say that even all these years later, I still think this guitar looks absolutely awesome. And I don't think I ever really appreciated just how good the woods on this look until I started filming the B-roll clips for this video. Despite being a plain maple top, this one has all sorts of little marks and details that make it really unique. And the mahogany on the back also looks great in my opinion. In general, I think these woods have a lot of depth to them, and I hope that comes across in the footage. Really, the only downside to this finish is that it's a bit of a dust magnet, and thanks to the color, any little bits of dust and debris and animal hair show up very clearly in all the pictures and B-roll, so sorry about that if it's been a little distracting. I swear I've spent more time probably dusting this thing off between filming clips than I did actually filming them, and somehow there still ended up being little bits of stuff on it by the time I hit record. As far as the playing experience goes, I still think this guitar plays great even though it definitely needs some fretwork. The neck feels a bit slimmer than some Les Pauls I've tried, so if I had to describe it, I'd say it probably sits somewhere between a 50s and 60s neck carve, and I personally find it very comfortable. I'm also a big fan of the shorter Gibson scale length. Because I've always had slightly smaller hands, this has always been a lot more comfortable to me than the more common 25.5-inch scale you see on most other guitars. This was also the first super resonant electric guitar that I owned, which is a big reason why this stood out from every other guitar that I had played up to that point. To me, nothing really beats the feeling of strumming a chord and feeling like the guitar is alive in your hands. For those of you who may have seen another video of mine where I've talked for way too long about guitar resonance, just know that this is the guitar that is at least mostly responsible for that slight obsession of mine. My only real complaint about playing this guitar is that the binding edges, like all Les Paul customs, are very square, and because of that, this guitar can have a tendency to feel like it's digging into you while you're playing it. To be fair, this is just something that most Les Paul fans, myself included, get used to, and thankfully over the years, the edges on mine have softened a bit. As far as how this guitar sounds, I gotta admit I'm not really crazy about the stock pickups these days. The 498T and 490R set has been a fairly divisive pickup set for many years, and while I don't exactly hate them like some people do, I do have some issues with the way they sound in this guitar. There's definitely a consistent fullness to the sound, which I do like, and I think it can work really well sometimes, but other times I feel like this guitar can come across as a bit too muddy or undefined, even after swapping out the pots. I've also noticed that the low end in particular can get a little boomy on this guitar, but since I'm using mostly digital stuff these days like my Axe effects, this is something I can somewhat easily account for by dialing in a low cut anywhere between 80 and 100 Hz. This specific bridge pickup can also just have a little bit too much mid-range honk for my tastes, and in addition to the muddiness I mentioned earlier, it can also sound strangely brittle with certain high gain tones. Over the years, I've tried messing with the pickup height, since for those of you who might not know this, adjusting the height of the pickups can actually really affect the way they sound. Unfortunately, I just haven't really been able to find a setting that I consistently like the sound of, so I think it might be time to swap these out for something else. Right now, I'm strongly considering getting a set of bare knuckle pickups for this, and specifically I'm leaning towards getting a set of bare knuckle cold sweats, but I'll be sure to make an update video if I ever do decide to swap out the pickups. For now, I'm going to play a few more sound examples through my Axe effects, and you guys can let me know what you think about how this guitar sounds in the comments down below. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this Les Paul Custom is very, very special to me. And making this video has honestly reminded me that I definitely need to be playing this guitar more than I have been in recent years. This isn't a perfect guitar by any means, and in the many years since first getting it, I've been lucky enough to get a lot of guitars that many people would consider to be objectively better, but even still, I absolutely love this thing. This guitar has been there with me through a lot of my growth as a musician, and it's been with me through so much of my life at this point that I honestly can't imagine a future without it. As cheesy as this last point may be, in addition to just being an awesome guitar, this one also serves as a reminder that I'm lucky enough to have a lot of amazing and incredibly supportive people in my life, and some of those people have supported me ever since I was just one of many kids with dreams of becoming a professional musician someday. I don't know what the future holds in that regard, but what I do know is that every time I pick up this guitar, I'm reminded of all of the amazing people in my corner. To wrap up this video, I want to take a moment to just say thank you to my family, my friends, and just every single one of you that watches these videos, likes, subscribes, shares, and just generally does your part to help with the growth of this channel and support me. Your guys' support means the world to me, and honestly, it's one of the main reasons why I'm able to even make videos about the things that I'm passionate about. So once again, thank you all so much. I hope you guys found this video interesting since it's very different from my normal style of guitar demo and review. Let me know what you thought about this style of video in the comments down below, and also feel free to let me know about any sentimental guitars you might own. As always, thank you so much for watching this video all the way to the end. Links to my Patreon and other social media accounts are in that description box down below, so feel free to check those out if you're interested. That's pretty much it for this video though, so until next time, take care, and I hope to see you all again soon.